Just a tiny bit.
How do you find films that haven't been made? Is that really...
You mean at this moment in history,
Well,
hasn't
yes,
everything been done?
Well, Mark was saying that he's had the beginning credits and the end credits that he's produced of films that haven't been made.
Oh, I see. Right.
I mean, I only found those two, but I could also point to the 90% of the films that I never made. I mean, I don't know, it's a sort of...
And also, I think that's the topic of not showing at the cinema. Have you seen the brochure?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So the idea is how many films there are that have never actually, that have been planned, thought of, conceived, and have never actually been made.
Probably like 90% of all films.
Yes, because I was saying to Frank a little bit earlier that in a sense, when one thinks of films that haven't been made, one also realizes what a miracle it is that any films are made at all, seeing how difficult it is to get the conditions right and to make a movie ever. Anyway, any other points? Yes, please.
I'll shout. Looking at your film album in part and looking at the image you had where you pull back and it goes to a mosaic imagery.
Oh, that's just my screensaver.
Yeah, I began to think of a comparison with jigsaws. And jigsaws are ways of killing time, are they not? Thinking about Margaret Drabble's recent book about happening in the park. And I wondered what you felt about that as a comparison, with the idea that cinema is a way of killing time. And my mother used to think that going to see movies in the afternoon when I was growing up in the 50s, very, very simple, because it was daylight. So that kind of notion that the cinematic experience is an absorbing way of just killing time.
I'm going to hand that one over to you, Laura.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. That any entertainment, I suppose, is killing time. But I think the cinema probably is more than any, because what it wants you to do is move into another time, the fictional time and space of the story. So it does want you to forget any other time apart from that one. And I think that's why there's such a shock, perhaps, when you suddenly become aware of your present moment of time when you're watching a film. And also there's a shock when you suddenly become aware of the original moment of time in which the film was registered. And suddenly you're taken out of that escape, as it's clichédly called, and suddenly kind of think about the paradoxes of time that are there in the cinema altogether. So I think the complicated thing is the way in which popular entertainment cinema that we all love so much is killing time, but it also is so integrally about time, different levels of time, paradoxes of time, that now that we're in what's kind of sometimes rather vulgarly called a post-cinematic world, that we can look back on the history of cinema and see it refracted in these very different ways, which is, I think, out of that very different perspective on the history of cinema that someone like Mark suddenly becomes interested in rear projection and sees it in a completely different way. So although, I mean, I can see what your mother meant in the 1950s, I think that now, with so many different ways of watching old movies, that they become, to a certain extent, transformed into a rather different kind of spectacle. And we can think about these imponderables and paradoxes a little bit more. And someone like Mark then ends up using the cinema as a frame of reference.
In a way that the gentleman's question hides the most complicated. The gentleman's question, hides the most complicated question of all time. This relationship of a work of art to its ability to register the present, or to register contemporaneity, or how can an image be contemporaneous with itself? How can it be? I mean, this is something that tracks the whole history of modernity, and in particular the whole history of modernism. I mean, in Baudelaire, it's precisely about Baudelaire's mourning of the evanescence of the magic of the present as it disappears into the past, and how to hold that present long enough for it to become something palpable. And of course, the invention of cinema or film tracks more or less this history from the late 19th century through to recent until more or less now. And the problem with film, which I guess I should have been more honest about, the problem with film is that I'll put it this way, if one goes to look at a picture in the National Gallery, we've spoken about this, so let's say, any picture you like, one of the extraordinary things about that picture is that it depicts time in a very complicated way. It depicts the time when it was made, as Laura's pointed out. It depicts the time, and it also depicts a compressed time because the painter may or may not have wanted to instill into that still image a question of time passing. In other words, how he most often has incorporated a kind of narrative of time into a single image which actually has no time.
Well, like the spinning top in the Chardin.
Perfect example. And what that means is that as the spectator stands in front of that image, the spectator is unfortunately moving in the same beat as real time. In other words, he or she is moving ever and inevitably towards his or her end. But the picture is not. The picture is moving to a different time. It's moving to a much more complex time. And it's this dialectical relationship that people think constitutes one of the unique characteristics of the artistic experience. So you have someone like Michael Fried, and I'll finish, who would say that...
Michael Fried is, I'm not sure if everybody knows, he's a very eminent US art critic and theorist.
And he would say that the problem with film is that it can never really be properly modern because the time of film is equivalent to the time of its watching. In other words, there isn't this dialectical difference between its... And to put it in layman's terms, or to put it in my terms, in a way I can understand, the problem with film is that it is a machine for destruction of the image. Each image destroys the previous image. Every image is never there. Every image is an evanescent image that is replaced by the one that comes. And not only is it replaced by the one that it comes in material form, but its replacement is expected and desired. In other words, what's going to come next? So, returning to your image of your discussion of Algonquin Park, the problem with Algonquin Park early March is the expectation of what will happen next. And this immediately, this desire for the image to reveal itself, it's a little bit like the death wish, it's the death drive. It's equivalent to the mortality of our mortality, unfortunately.
I wanted to show a last short work just at the end, just before we go for drinks, but I want to ask if there are any other points or questions first. Yes, please.
Hello. Could you talk about your expectations of whether looking at your work is on the spectator's part, an emotional or an intellectual response? Do you have an expectation of what the spectator will get from what you do?
I think what I tried to say before is that I don't put anything into my work that I don't think is already there. What that means is that the work is a kind of phenomenological, as much as it can be, a phenomenological response to a situation, an experience, an image, a thought, a place that is there. I like to think that I make films of things that make me stop and be attentive. And I imagine that there is somebody else out there who might, when I'm standing looking at, say, the strange perspective of the trees in the frozen lake, they look like they're growing the wrong way, which allows that perspectival illusion of the sky and the ground. I like to think that there's another person out there that might also be stopped and struck. So I make that work for her or him. And if they don't exist, I make it for me. And I think that the most important person in the equation of art is the spectator or the subject. And I believe that the experience of the subject is very, very close and approximate. This is, you know, Kantian or whatever. It's approximately and close to the idea of the artist. That is, that every subject, when he or she looks at a work, remakes it as if they were the artist. Therefore, you know, whatever you, I mean, I don't mean to sort of, you know, sound like that, you know, any interpretation is okay, but whatever you think is whatever is what's there, you know. So